Hello, everyone. Hola, mi gente. Welcome and bienvenidos. My name is Chris Aviles, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Partner Colleges and Scholar Support here at TheDream.Us. I will be helping facilitate today's sessions on ITINs, opening stores, where we will be talking about ITINs, the benefits, and how you can go about applying for one. After the session, we will have about 30 minutes dedicated to getting your ITIN questions answered by our expert, Francine Littman. So as you are listening to the presentation, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat so that we may address them during the ending of today's session. As a reminder, this session will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel by early next week. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. Before we get to our amazing guest speaker, I want to highlight some of the great resources regarding ITINs that can be found on our website. If you go to www.thedream.us/ITIN, you will be able to find an ITIN application guide, FAQs, and some other great materials to help you get started with your ITIN process. All of these documents were created by our Senior Program Manager of Career Supports, Nicole Wesley, who has done an amazing job of organizing this information specifically for you. So please do not let all of Nicole's hard work go to waste, and make sure that you go onto the website and benefit from these resources. While an ITIN does not provide you legal status or work authorization, it is a powerful tool for those not eligible for a Social Security number, not only in paying taxes, but in other things such as opening a bank account, applying for an EIN, and pursuing entrepreneurial career opportunities through independent contract work, freelancing, and even starting your own business. Next slide. So today is our final ITIN session of the spring semester. If you want to view any of these 3 spring webinar recordings, check out our ITIN playlist on our YouTube channel. You can also get the links to the recordings and much more on our ITIN website, which I just mentioned earlier, and get all of that information. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Francine J. Littman, who is a professor of law at UNLV Boyd School of Law. Her area of expertise include tax law and taxation of business entities. She is a frequent speaker on tax subjects to law and business groups, and works with undocumented immigrants, including entrepreneurs, in their tax-related endeavors. Professor Littman is also an IRS authorized certifying acceptance agent, which means she has the ability to assist individuals in completing and submitting their ITIN application materials. Without further ado, Professor Littman, thank you again for being with us today, and I will pass off the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Chris and team, TheDream.Us scholars. Each and all of you are so fortunate to be in this program, and I applaud each and all of you for all the hard work I know you're putting into your education. As a law professor, I always appreciate it when my students, or you, who I hope someday are in the pipeline maybe for my law classes, are reaching out to educate yourself and doing things above and beyond just sitting in the classroom, doing your homework and reading. So please do use the chat feature to ask any and all questions, and I'll try to kind of keep my eye on those questions just to see if I can answer them live, but we will have ample time for you to either have someone else ask the question or unmute yourself and ask the question, but we really do want to address your specific issues and concerns. As Chris indicated, the resources are phenomenal. Many of them are one-pagers and very user-friendly. And what the team here at TheDream.Us Scholars has put together is frequently asked questions. And so they are anticipating what you're going to ask, and I'm going to try and answer them in my presentation. But if we don't, please do ask them. So next slide. What is an ITIN? Well, an ITIN is a taxpayer identification number. It is issued by the Internal Revenue Service. So the Internal Revenue Service is the administrative agency that is charged with collecting federal income taxes. And this letter was designed to allow individuals who do not qualify for a Social Security number to obtain this number, but the purpose of the ITIN is solely to file your federal income taxes. And that's why you're going to see, in order to get one, you have to have a federal income tax obligation. And what that means, generally speaking, is that you have taxable income during the year and then need to file a return. If you don't yet have a tax obligation because you're not earning any income, you're going to have to wait for that moment in time. And the ITIN, the tax resource webpage that we talked about, is going to have some ideas on how you might create a tax obligation or what arises to the level of a tax obligation. So an ITIN was created by the federal government to allow people who don't qualify for a Social Security number to be able to file taxes. It looks very similar to a Social Security number in that it's 9 digits. It has dashes after the first 3 and the second 2, but an ITIN always starts with a 9, the number 9. That's the way you can identify it. Prior to 1996, which is probably prior to when most of you were born, individuals, whether or not they were legally present in the United States or not, they could get a Social Security number. The federal government pushed back on that, and beginning in 1996, you cannot qualify for a Social Security number unless you are authorized legally to work in the United States. And so taxpayers who are not legally authorized but are receiving income do have a tax obligation, and so they need a number to file, and that's why the ITIN was created. ITINs used to be issued on a card that looked quite a bit like a Social Security card. However, it is green. It is green now because there was confusion as to an ITIN versus a Social Security number. Now ITINs are issued on letters. And so, but if you have a parent or a grandparent who has an ITIN on a card, that's the reason why, because they used to be issued on these cards, but now for many years now, they've issued on a letter. And the letter comes from the Internal Revenue Service. Next slide, please. So I pretty much answered this question. The reason ITINs were created is to provide people who don't qualify for a Social Security number with a number that they can file a return with. What's kind of interesting, at least to me, as a tax nerd, is that you can't file a tax return unless you have a taxpayer identification number. And that is either a Social Security number or an ITIN. So you can't file a return without one of those numbers. Next slide. Who uses ITINs? Well, it has to be someone who does not qualify for a Social Security number. So who doesn't qualify for a Social Security number? Well, foreign investors, as you know, there are a lot of investors across the globe who want to buy US stock or invest money in a US bank, or who maybe want to buy a rental property in the United States, or who want to start a business in the United States. So a foreign investor who doesn't live or isn't physically present in the United States and who doesn't have work authorization, they need an ITIN. In addition, it could be an undocumented immigrant, right, who is in this country, subject to federal income taxes, and does not qualify for a Social Security number. However, I have worked with individuals who are not US citizens, but they are working in the United States. They have a green card, or maybe they have an employment visa, but their spouse or their children do not qualify for the employment visa or for a Social Security number. And so they need an ITIN. Once you are issued an ITIN, you use that ITIN even if it expires. And I'm going to explain to you when and how it can expire. If it expires, that's the number. Once you get a number, that's your number forevermore. Now, if you do get authorization to work so that you qualify for a Social Security number, then you use the Social Security number as soon as you qualify for one, and then you no longer use the ITIN. And in fact, if you're in that position, you should write a letter to the IRS asking them to move your record from the ITIN to the Social Security number. You also might ask the credit agencies to do the same thing. Next slide. What is an ITIN used for? Well, it is issued by the federal government specifically to file federal income taxes. However, a lot of other businesses and agencies use this number for identification purposes. So, for example, banks. If you open a savings account that's interest bearing, they'll want your ITIN. If you secure a driver's license, they often want your taxpayer identification number, which if you don't have a Social Security number is your ITIN. Getting a mortgage, if you buy a home, the bank will want your taxpayer identification number. If you are applying for an employer identification number, if you want to start a business, you need an ITIN to get an EIN. If you are applying and participating in paid internships, they often ask you for your taxpayer identification number, and that's the ITIN. Next slide. There are a lot of benefits for applying for an ITIN. And of course, you always want to be compliant with the tax laws. It is critically important for everyone to be compliant with the tax laws. But I would say for individuals who are hoping someday to legalize their presence in the United States, they would definitely want to make sure that they're compliant with the tax laws, because this is looked at from a perspective of federal agencies, including federal judges, as good moral character. In addition, it helps you document your residence in the United States. And it also helps you document other factors in your life, like your marital status, whether you have qualifying dependents, or maybe whether you're a dependent of your parents. It also helps you get certain tax benefits. Certain states, in addition to the federal government, have different tax credits, which if they are refundable, meaning they not only offset your federal tax liability, but they generate a cash refund, those credits can be very helpful. You can't get those credits. You can't access them unless you have a taxpayer identification number, again, either a social security number or an ITIN. You really want to be compliant and file your tax returns to the extent you have an obligation so that you can be in good standing with the federal government and state taxing authorities as well. Next slide. Some of you might have been claimed as a dependent on your parents' tax return. And so how will you know if your parents did claim you on their tax return, then they would have had to get a taxpayer identification number for you. And so you might already have an ITIN. Ask your parents first, and if they filed income tax returns, then you can look on that income tax return in the dependent area, and you should see your name if they claimed you. And after your name, that's on the first page of the tax return. After it's about a third of the way down, you'll see your name, and then it'll say, I believe it says social security number, but your ITIN will be there. Your parents also might have your ITIN assignment letter, and so you might ask them. If they don't have that letter, look at the Form 1040, which is your parents' income tax return. And if they claimed you as a dependent, it certainly should be there. Next slide. How do you apply for an ITIN? Well, you use a form W7. It's W as in Wally -7. And if you Google it, it'll pop up on your screen. But we have a wonderful link here, and there are links again at TheDream.Us ITIN application guide. It's a one-page form, and it's actually pretty easy to fill out, but I'm going to walk you through how to fill it out. So next slide, please. The top half of this document is maybe the hardest area to fill out, and that is that if you look to the right-hand side, you must check a box. And the IRS says one of the biggest mistakes on these forms is that a box isn't checked up at the top here. So if you don't have an ITIN, then you're applying for a new ITIN. If you have an ITIN and the IRS has sent you a letter or your parents a letter saying it expired, then you're going to be renewing your ITIN. So then you would check the second box. In addition, the next area on this upper half of the W7 asks, why do you need an ITIN? And so the answer that you're going to give, you are, because you're physically present in the United States and have been for more than 183 days, you therefore, under federal tax law, are a U.S. resident alien. That is the term of art in the law. You're a U.S. resident because you're physically present more than 183 days, and they use the term alien to indicate that you are not a U.S. citizen. So you are a U.S. resident alien based on number of days present in the United States. So this is box C, and you're going to be filing a U.S. federal tax return. So if that is the case, you check box C. However, if you are being claimed on your parents' tax return, then you're going to check box D. And then you're going to have to indicate who is claiming you as a dependent on the return, and they're going to ask you to put that person's social security number on this form. If you're married to a US citizen or a resident alien who has a federal tax filing obligation, then you would check box E. You are a spouse, and you would have to put their name and their social security number or ITIN number on the rest of the line to the right. Boxes F, G, and H are not applicable to you who are students in the United States who don't qualify for a social security number. Next slide. So could you go back a slide? Sorry about that. I jumped ahead. So the next line is pretty self-evident. You put your first name, your middle name if you have a middle name, and then your last name. And if your name at birth was different, so for example, if you got married, so your last name changed, then you would put your different name at birth. If you're not married, then it's going to be your birth name. So then you wouldn't fill out line 1B unless for some reason you had a legal name change. Now, next slide. The address. So that's pretty straightforward. You put your street address, you put your city, state, zip code. It's really important that this is someplace you get mail timely, because the IRS doesn't email you, they don't call you, they don't text you, they use the US Postal Service, so a mailing address is critical. Foreign address, you likely don't have one, so leave that blank. Your birth information, your date of birth, your country of birth, your city and state or province of birth, if you have one, you can leave that blank. Then your gender, as at birth, I suppose, or what you identify as. Then line 6A is country of citizenship. So you put the appropriate country. Foreign tax ID number, if you don't have one, just leave it blank or put NA, not applicable. Line 6C is type of US visa. Likely don't have one. If you have one, describe it and put the number. If you don't have one, again, put NA. I like to put NA, not applicable, in any box you're not answering, just to make sure that you're not missing a box. Line 6D, you're going to have to put your identification number or number of an identification document. The best document to identify you is your passport. We're going to talk about what documents you need. So you would check that box passport. You would say who it was issued by. You would put the number. You would put the date that the passport is going to expire. All of these things you get right off the passport or whatever other document. Date of entry into the US. This one is often a little challenging for some folks, but if you don't remember the exact date, you probably remember the month. You could put July 1st of whatever year. If you remember it was summer, July, June. If it was winter, January. So do the best job you have of putting the correct date there. But I have never seen an ITIN application rejected for not having a date, a correct date there. You need to put a date there, but don't stress too much about having the exact date. Line 6E is just a simple yes or no. Have you previously received an ITIN? If you have an ITIN, then you're asking for a renewal. So if you say yes here, then you're going to have to put the ITIN number there. And if it's issued in put your name here, again, fill out every line, first name, middle name, and last name that it was issued. Line 6G is not relevant. That's for people who are here on student visas. And then you sign your name, you date it, you can put your phone number or not. If there's a minor, a child who isn't going to sign, then their representative, probably their parent, would sign on their behalf. That's it. Next slide. Now, I just went through the form. The good news, bad news is there are 14 pages of instructions. And so, but you don't have to worry if you didn't get every description I described there, because the instructions are also readily available online, and you can listen to this recording as many times as you want and get answers to all your questions. But read the instructions if you're concerned, or certainly access any of the user-friendly documents TheDream.Us has put together. Next slide. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. Unfortunately, you're also going to have to submit a completed federal income tax return. You cannot apply for an ITIN without a completed tax return, because the federal government is issuing this because you have a tax obligation. In addition to the W-7 and a tax return, you're also going to have to prove to the federal government you exist. Unfortunately, you have to use original documentation or certified copies. What that means is, unless you can use a different resource, you're going to have to mail in your original documents to prove you exist and to prove that you're a foreign person. A notary cannot make certified copies for you. So a certified copy is issued from the original agency that issued your document, like a birth certificate. Next slide. What documents are accepted for ITIN applications? The one document that's the silver bullet that proves both your identity and your foreign status is the passport. A current passport. It's got your picture. It's also got your country of origin, so it proves up both. That's the best document. If you don't have that, though, there are alternatives. In order to prove your identity, it's got to have a photo. And so the most common photo ID is your driver's license. If you don't have a US driver's license that, again, has an expired, maybe a foreign driver's license, a US state ID card, a US military ID card. Again, the most common document here is a US driver's license. Now you've got to prove your foreign status. So you're going to need two documents if you don't have the passport. To prove your foreign status, the best document is your birth certificate. Other options are a visa, a foreign military ID card, a national ID card that shows your photo, your name, your current address, your date of birth, and an expiration date. For children who aren't going to have a driver's license, we would use their birth certificate and then perhaps school records, but it has to be issued by the school. If it's someone who's not in school, it could be medical records from a doctor. So you can see for minors, it's much more challenging. Next slide. As I said, ITIN holders, in order to get an ITIN, you have to prove your status as a foreign individual and your identity. By the way, you need to do this complete process, whether it's for the original application or for a renewal. Renewal requires the same process. If the passport is for a dependent from a country other than Canada, Mexico, or a dependent of a member of the US military, their passport needs a date of entry. If it's a dependent who is a child, as I said, then you can either use school records or medical records. It's difficult to get ITINs for these very young children because it's hard to find the documentation. Birth certificate and then medical records, again, have to be original from the hospital, from the doctor, or school records. Next slide. If you don't want to send in your original documents, which I certainly don't want anyone to have to do that, the best way is to get a certifying acceptance agent. As Chris mentioned, I am a CAA, a certifying acceptance agent. That is someone that has been trained with forensically to be able to see if a document is fraudulent, to be able to review documents and understand their integrity. There are a number of CAAs across the country. Unfortunately, most of them do charge a fee. The fees can be as much as $325 I've seen CAAs as low as $75. The IRS website has a great link to find them perhaps in your location. In addition, the Internal Revenue Service has taxpayer assistance centers across the country where certain of these TACs do have CAAs. You're going to have to do some homework and find one in your area. And this link will allow you to put your zip code in. And then you're going to need to call them to see if they have a CAA. You can make an appointment. Unfortunately, this is tax season, so these taxpayer assistance centers are pretty booked up. You might have to wait until after tax season, but that's another option. Next slide. As I said, CAAs can authenticate documents so you don't have to mail them in. Go to these lists, see if there's someone in your area, call them. Don't be intimidated to find out what their fee structure is. The good news is there are some VITA programs, and that's volunteer income tax assistance programs, which are free programs that will do your tax returns. Some of them do offer free CAA services. There aren't enough of them, but here's a great link to find VITA programs that offer CAA services. Hopefully there's one in your area. Next slide. Where to apply, you're going to have to mail this application to the IRS, either with original documents plus a tax return. So that's a bit of a heavy lift. Taxpayer assistance centers, some of them can help you. You need to make an appointment. They're often booked out in advance. Certifying acceptance agents can often help you. Unfortunately, they typically do charge a fee. They might do your tax return as well, but of course, that's going to add more fees. Next slide. Here are some free resources that we hope will be valuable to you. Beginning this month, I think it actually opened its doors March 4th. There is an online program called Direct File. It's at irs.gov. That's the IRS's website. And it is an online user-friendly program, and ITIN holders can use this program to file their tax return, to prepare and electronically file it for free. Unfortunately, you can't use it if you don't have an ITIN, because in order to start the return, you need a taxpayer identification number. In addition to this direct file, at the IRS website, there's another link that's free file. and there are a myriad of different programs. Again, all of these, you need a taxpayer identification number to start it. You can electronically file for free, electronically pay any tax to, and hopefully get a direct deposit of your refund. Here's the VITA link. So volunteer income tax assistance programs are very valuable. They prepare your tax returns with excellent resources. They're very knowledgeable. They're well-trained. They have software. They can electronically file it and pay your taxes or get your refund deposited for free. They specifically target lower income households and English as a second language speakers. So that's a good resource as well. If none of those work, you might contact the low-income taxpayer clinic in your area. They do not prepare returns. They do not prepare ITIN applications, but they might have a good referral for you. Here's another link to be able to find the low-income taxpayer clinic in your area. Next slide. And I'm just about done, so you can ask your questions. And the last thing I want to tell you is if you do use a paid preparer, make sure you get a copy of your return, you sign it, look at the return, make sure it's accurate, and make sure to open an online account with the IRS. Next slide. Questions. We made it to the end and we've got more than 20 minutes for questions. So that's almost a minute for each of you. So ask away.
Thank you so much, Professor Littman. We do have one question already in the chat. So I'll just iterate that for you. So are TPS holders and DACA recipients applying for a mortgage loan falling under the US resident aliens as well?
So if you have work authorization, you qualify for a Social Security and number. And so therefore you do not qualify for an ITIN. And you should use the Social Security number for all of your tax filing. And let's suppose you were authorized to work, so you got a Social Security number, but then your work authorization lapsed. You should definitely continue to use that Social Security number. Even if you don't have work authorization, you use that Social Security number until you are no longer on this side of the planet. So Social Security numbers are for life. So I think I answered that question. So if you have TPS and you have work authorization, then you qualify for a Social Security number. If you don't qualify for a Social Security number and you have to file a tax return, you then qualify for an ITIN. So they're mutually exclusive. However, Chris, you could have an ITIN and then you get work authorization. So then you qualify for an SSN. So then you use the SSN.
Thank you so much. I have another question. Can I apply to jobs with an ITIN number?
So an ITIN does not authorize work. So an ITIN is not a Social Security number, and so it does not allow you to work in the United States.
Thank you. And I just want to take a step back for the last question, Professor Littman, because I think they were specifically asking if they should list themselves as a US resident alien if they're applying for a home mortgage, if they are under DACA or TPS.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. I went off and so yes, they are. For tax purposes, they are a US resident alien. But as many of you know, for immigration purposes, that means something different. But for tax purposes, you're right. They are US resident alien.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Uh, we have another question. Can you invest in the stock market with an ITIN?
Yes. You can open a bank account, a savings account. You can buy stock. It's a taxpayer identification number.
Thank you so much. So, can I get an ITIN without income?
The answer to that question is a bit complicated. And the answer is that generally speaking, you need income to file a tax return, right? You don't have a federal income tax obligation unless you have income. However, if you are a student, which I know most, if not all of you are, and you are paying out of pocket, not meaning not with a scholarship, if you are paying out of pocket for tuition and fees, and you are in the first 4 years of your higher education of your college, first 4 years, then there is a tax credit called the American Opportunity Tax Credit. It is partially refundable. So to the extent you qualify for this American Opportunity Tax Credit, and if you Google that, you'll get the IRS website that'll explain exactly what you need to qualify for it. And generally speaking, first 4 years of higher education, you need a taxpayer identification number like an ITIN. It has to be monies that you paid for required tuition and fees or required books. And up to a portion of that is refundable. So you could file a tax return with, if you qualify for this credit. However, Chris, not surprisingly, if you file a tax return with the federal government asking for this tax credit and a up to $1,000 refund, the federal government is going to be thinking, well, how did this person survive if they had no income? You need to report all of your income, even if it's cash income, even if it is something that how are you living? When someone says they have no income, I say, well, how are you living? One answer could be you're living off of savings, right? That could be the answer. Or you're living off of scholarships. But Chris, if you're living off of scholarships, that means your scholarships exceed your tuition fees, required books, and supplies, because people need to eat and they need to live somewhere. And so if you have scholarships that are greater than your tuition fees, books, and required books and supplies, you are really fortunate because you are really benefiting. And that's the good news. The bad news is you have taxable income. So you need to file a tax return and include that on your tax return. Next
Amazing.
question.
Thank you. This did not come in through the chat today, but it was in one of our earlier sessions, and I think it sort of relates to what you were already talking about, Professor Littman. So, a student asked last session, is there a limit for a person to file taxes? I'm asking because one of my friends only made $2,000 in 2023.
So that is again, a complicated question. I hate to, as a tax person, and I'm a lawyer too, so I want to say it depends. Well, so the good news is $2,000. And if it is someone who is not authorized to work, then I'm going to assume that is $2,000 as an independent contractor. And so if they have $2,000 as an independent contractor, they're going to have to file a tax return to pay their self-employment taxes. The good news, though, is there's a standard deduction amount for single unmarried people that's almost $14,000. So $2,000 is a lot lower than $14,000, so they won't have any income taxes, but they will have to pay payroll taxes on the $2,000 reduced by any expenses. And that is going to give them a tax filing obligation where they can then file and get an ITIN.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have another question which you sort of answered before, but maybe we can iterate a little bit more. Can I start a business with an ITIN number?
So the answer is yes. And but what I know your the leadership at TheDream.Us and other immigrants groups that I work with, they talk about starting your own business. And typically, if you start your own business, you're going to want an employer identification number, and that's the EIN. And if you, in order to get an EIN, you need an ITIN. And so if you are not hiring employees, you could just use your ITIN for the business, but my sense is most of the groups I work with that focus on immigrants want them to get an EIN. And so the nice thing is, once you get an ITIN, you can go online to the IRS website and get an EIN very quickly, same day service online without much more information. So you can start a business with an ITIN, and you can also get an EIN, an employer identification number, with an ITIN. You cannot get an EIN without an ITIN.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Lippman. The questions are slowly coming in now. So, what section do we fill in the Form W-7 if we are seeking to get an ITIN for a paid internship? And how does it really work?
So if you are physically present in the United States for, so here's a little, I'm gonna think about your question a little bit, because you want to get the paid internship. You don't yet have the paid internship. So this is this is a chicken and the egg problem. You can't get the ITIN until you have a tax obligation, and the tax obligation is often the paid internship. And so you can't get the ITIN without a tax return. And if you don't have any income, then you really don't have a tax obligation unless you can try to qualify for this American Opportunity Tax Credit. And I apologize that the system is broken, but you know that better than I know that.
Thank you so much for that. This is one of our stock questions, and please feel free to keep adding your questions to the chat. We don't have any new questions, so I will go to some of our questions from last sessions that I think were really good and might be helpful for folks here to also learn about. I got an ITIN in 2019 and haven't used it since. Is it no longer valid?
So that is a great question, and I kind of apologize for not talking about why you might need to renew an ITIN. The only reason you need to renew an ITIN at this moment in time is because it hasn't been used on a tax return for the 3 prior consecutive years. And so 2019, if we look back to 2019, was beyond 3 years, right? And so if you haven't filed a tax return with an ITIN within the last 3 years, you're going to have to renew it. So what if you're not sure, let's just suppose you're not sure. And it could, if your parents claimed you on a tax return, that counts as using the number. So if you're not sure, what you can do is use that ITIN. By the way, once you have an ITIN, that is yours forever. You don't get a new one when you renew it. So if you have an ITIN, if you're not sure if it's expired or not, use it on a tax return.
I'm sorry, Dr. Littman, I think you are frozen. I think we lost Dr. Littman for a second.
File a tax return, and you
Uh,
see me now?
Hi, Dr. Littman.
Yeah,
We lost you for a bit there, and
okay.
so maybe go back maybe 2 minutes.
Sure. Yeah. So a ITIN will only expire and need to be renewed if it hasn't been used on a tax return for 3 consecutive years. So that's either you using it or your parents using it. And so, but if you don't know, let's just suppose your parents are not accessible and you don't know. What you should do is use that ITIN and file a tax return using it. You can use it direct file, you could use it free file, you could use it through a VITA program, or the last case, a paid preparer. We want you to use the free resources. And you file it. The IRS will send you a letter back if it has expired. And they will send you a letter, and the letter will tell you how to renew it. And it's going to describe the process just like I described it. And they will probably even include a W-7. And so they will let you know, we can't process your return because your ITIN has expired, and therefore you need to renew it for us to process the return. So that's a good way to check it out. If some people have another question, Chris, sometimes people ask is, if my ITIN has expired, can I use it for a paid internship? And the answer is yes, you can give it to them for their information reporting. You can use it on a bank account. You can use it, but then when you file the tax return, you'll have to renew it. And as I said, if you're not sure, you can file the tax return first, and the IRS will respond to you through the US Postal Service with a letter telling you they couldn't process the return.
Thank you so much, Professor Littman. We have another question here. I'll start with the second one because I'm not exactly sure what if I have the right term for the first question, but we are hoping to offer NBOs and NEBOs called Educational Leadership Service Awards in the near future. Can our students use this opportunity to apply for an ITIN? These come through a payment each term. They actively have an ELSA. Is there a benefit to not claiming it as taxable income?
Well, it kind of depends. So I'm not sure what this is. If it's starting to sound, let's see, non-employment based opportunity. So it sounds a little bit like it's a scholarship. If it's a scholarship, scholarships that are used for tuition fees, required books, those are excluded from income. So those are not taxable. And so then you don't have a tax filing obligation. But if it is not for work, but it is a taxable stipend, then they have to include it in gross income and they can file a tax return with it. And so, yes, they can then apply for an ITIN. I did see another great question. Oh, so somebody already answered it. Boy, the staff here has listened to my spiel so many times, they have answers. Yeah. So if your ITIN was issued when you were dependent and you're no longer dependent, guess what? You stick with that same number. That number is yours until you get a social security number.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We learn a lot from you, Professor. We are coming close to the hour. I don't think there are any new questions in the chat, so maybe we can do one more of the student stock questions. I think this is a good one. I am a waitress and my boss pays me under the table, meaning I get paid in cash. Um, how do I go about filing an ITIN with that and paying taxes? I also want to mention that I have a child.
So if you are paid in cash, you have to include it in gross income, and the cash payment is effectively characterizing you as an independent contractor because no one is paying payroll taxes there. So shame on your employer because you really are an employee probably, but in any case, it's complicated. So you're going to have to pick up that cash and you're going to have to prove that you got that cash, meaning monetize it, and you're going to have to do your best to estimate it. And then you report it on your tax return. You're going to have to pay payroll taxes on that because it is subject to its earned income, so it's subject to payroll taxes. And then you can claim your child as a dependent. If your child has a social security number, great. If your child has an ITIN, great, you'll claim the child. If your child doesn't have an ITIN, then you can apply for your child. That often is more challenging just because of gathering the documents. But cash compensation is income. And so it's got to be reported. And cash compensation is effectively, employers don't typically pay their employees with cash because there's federal and state withholding and payroll tax withholding. And so when you receive cash, generally speaking, you're being characterized as an independent contractor. You've got to pay payroll taxes, which is 15.3% on your net income. If your total income is less than, if she's with a child, she's probably head of household. So that's a higher standard deduction than the single standard deduction, single without dependents. And so she can probably make about $20,000 and not have federal income taxes, but you will owe payroll taxes on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Lippman. We are just at the hour right now. So again, I just want to thank you for your wealth of wisdom and expertise. Not only the scholars learned from you, as you can tell, our staff have already learned and will be filing their own tax certifications based on your lectures alone. So thank you so much. As a last announcement, I do want to again reiterate to students, to all of our scholars, please pay attention to our website. Please go on to those ITIN webpage to get all of the information and resources that have been put together there for you. Please also stay out on the lookout to our events calendar on our website for other amazing events such as these that are going to be coming up in the next few months so that you are informed and can benefit from all of the information that we are striving to share with you. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Have a great tax season.